On a warm Tuesday evening in late August, the kind where the air still holds the day's heat but the sky starts softening into that deep blue just before nightfall, Talia Brooks turned her old sedan onto Maple Ridge Road. She'd been up since before sunrise. First for her morning run, 3 miles, same as every day since basic training, then a full shift at the Veterans Outreach Center downtown. Her eyes were tired, but not the kind of tired sleep fixes. It was the slow, heavy kind that settles in your bones after you've spent hours listening to people tell you about their worst days, their lost brothers, their nightmares that won't quit. She didn't mind it, though. Helping others was how she stayed grounded after 2 tours overseas. Her car wasn't much to look at. 15 years old, faded navy paint, one door that only opened from the inside, but it ran. And right now it was taking her home. Home wasn't a big house or anything fancy, just a small apartment above a bookstore in a quiet part of town, with a window that caught the morning sun and a shelf full of dog-eared paperbacks she never had time to read. But it was hers. Earned. Paid for with every drop of sweat, every early morning, every moment she chose to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. She'd just passed the last grocery store before the county line when she saw the lights flash in her rearview mirror. Red and blue pulsing like a heartbeat. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her hands steady on the wheel. She signaled, slowed, and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The road was nearly empty, just a few scattered houses, tall pines lining the edge, and the hum of crickets starting up in the dusk. She rolled down her window and turned off the engine. Her military ID and driver's license were already in her wallet on the passenger seat. She'd done this before. Not often, but enough to know the drill. Be polite, stay calm, answer clearly, don't move suddenly. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser. One was tall, with a thick neck and mirrored sunglasses even though the sun had almost set. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, with a stiff posture like he was trying too hard to look tough. They approached slowly, flashlights in hand, though it wasn't dark enough to need them yet. "Evening," the older officer said, voice flat. He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just stood there, one hand resting near his belt. "Good evening, sir," Talia said. She kept her voice even, respectful but not submissive. She'd learned that balance in the Army. How to show discipline without shrinking yourself. License and registration. She reached for her wallet slowly, making sure to keep her movements visible. "Yes, sir. It's right here." She pulled out her driver's license and military ID together, holding them out. "I'm a U.S. Army specialist just coming home from work." The younger officer took the IDs and glanced at them, then back at her, like he didn't believe it. "You live around here?" "Yes, about 2 miles down in the Oakwood Apartments." He handed the IDs to his partner, who barely looked at them. "You know why we pulled you over?" "I think it might be my taillight," Talia said. "It's been flickering. I've got an appointment to get it fixed this weekend." The older officer grunted. "Flickering or out?" "It goes on and off," she said. "I noticed it last week." He didn't respond. Instead, he shined his flashlight directly into her eyes. She didn't flinch, but she blinked against the glare. "Step out of the vehicle." Her pulse jumped, but she kept her breathing slow. "Is there a reason, sir?" "I haven't done anything wrong." "Step out," he repeated, sharper this time. She hesitated for just a second, long enough to weigh her options. Arguing wouldn't help. Compliance might. She opened the door and stepped onto the gravel, keeping her hands visible at her sides. She was wearing her Outreach Center polo, khaki pants, and the lightweight jacket she always carried in the car. On the sleeve, the U.S. Army patch was clearly visible. "Turn around," the younger officer said. "Why?" she asked, voice calm but firm. "I haven't broken any laws. I have my license, my registration, and I'm a soldier returning from duty." "You're being uncooperative," the older officer snapped. "I'm asking for clarification," she said. "That's not uncooperative. That's knowing my rights." That's when things shifted. The older officer took a step closer. "Put your hands behind your back." "I haven't done anything," she said again, louder now, because something in his tone told her this wasn't just about a taillight anymore. "I'm a veteran. I served this country. I deserve to be treated with respect." "Respect?" He scoffed. "You think flashing a military card means you're above the law?" "I never said that," she replied. "I said I followed the law. I pulled over. I gave you my ID. I answered your questions." The younger officer reached for his cuffs. "Turn around now," She didn't move. Not out of defiance, but because every instinct in her body screamed that once her hands were behind her back, she'd lose all control. And in that moment, control was all she had. Then, without warning, the older officer grabbed her arm. Hard. She jerked back instinctively, not to fight, just to pull away from the pain. That's when he shouted, "She's resisting." "No, I'm not," she said, raising her voice but still not shouting. "I'm not resisting. I just don't want to be cuffed for a broken light." But they weren't listening. The younger officer lunged forward and she stepped back, arms up in front of her like a shield. "Don't touch me," she said, voice cracking now with fear. "I'm not armed. I'm not a threat." The older officer went for his holster, and in less than a minute, 60 seconds from the moment she stepped out of the car, he fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet evening. One shot, then silence. Talia collapsed onto the gravel, clutching her side. She didn't scream. She just gasped, eyes wide, staring up at the darkening sky as if trying to understand how this was happening. The officers stood frozen for a few seconds. No one called for an ambulance. No one knelt beside her. The younger one radioed in, voice shaky. "We've got a 1054 suspect down. Suspect, not woman. Not soldier. Not human. Suspect, a neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had been watering her roses on the porch next door. She heard the shot and saw everything from between the slats of her fence. She dropped her watering can and ran inside, dialing 911 herself. "They shot her," she told the dispatcher, voice trembling. "She wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there." By the time the ambulance arrived, Talia had lost a lot of blood. Paramedics worked fast, shouting orders, starting an IV, loading her onto a stretcher. One of them noticed the army patch on her jacket and frowned. "She's military?" "Yeah," another said grimly. "Looks like it." At the hospital, doctors stabilized her. The bullet had missed her spine by less than an inch. She was alive, but barely, and no one from the police department came to check on her. No apology, no explanation, just silence. Back at the station, the officers filed their report. They claimed Talia had lunged at them, that she reached for the officer's weapon, that they feared for their lives. None of it matched what Mrs. Callahan saw. None of it matched the dashcam footage from a passing delivery van that would surface days later. But in those first hours, their version was the only one that mattered. News of the shooting spread slowly. A local paper ran a short article. "Woman shot during traffic stop. No mention of her service. No photo. Just a few lines buried on page 6. Most people in town didn't even notice, but someone did." 1,000 miles away, at Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, a staff sergeant named Reyes was scrolling through his phone during a late-night coffee break. He'd served with Talia in Afghanistan. They'd shared MREs in the dust, watched sunrises over Kandahar, and promised each other they'd make it home. When he saw her name in a headline, just a snippet from a local news alert, his blood ran cold. He called the outreach center where she worked. No answer. Then he called her brother, Darnell, whose number he still had saved from a group text years ago. "Hey, man," Darnell answered, voice thick with exhaustion. "You're not going to believe what happened." And that's how the Army found out. Because in the U.S. military they have a rule. No soldier gets left behind. Not in combat. Not in captivity. And, as it turned out, not even on a quiet road in their own country. But that call wouldn't come until midnight. For now, Talia lay unconscious in a hospital bed, machines beeping softly around her, while the town slept and the officers who shot her went home to their families, convinced they'd done nothing wrong. What they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Talia Brooks wasn't just a woman driving home after a long day. She was a soldier, and soldiers have brothers and sisters who don't forget. They don't stay silent, and they sure as hell don't let injustice slide. But all of that, the outrage, the investigation, the midnight phone call from a colonel who refused to let this go, was still hours away. In this moment, there was only the quiet hum of the hospital, the ache of a community beginning to stir, and the terrible weight of a truth no one wanted to face, that sometimes coming home is more dangerous than war. The night after the shooting, the hospital hallway outside Talia's room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Nurses moved in hushed steps, doctors spoke in low tones, and visitors were few. Her brother Darnell sat in a stiff plastic chair just outside the ICU door, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was praying even though he hadn't stepped inside a church in years. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much either. All he'd done was pace, make calls, and stare at the floor like it might give him answers. He'd been the one to get the call from the police, not right after it happened, but nearly 2 hours later, after the hospital had already listed her as critical. The officer on the phone sounded bored, like he was reading from a script. Your sister was involved in an incident. She's been shot. She's at County General. No, I'm sorry. No, we're investigating. Just facts. Cold and clipped. Darnell had driven there in a daze, his old truck rattling down the highway, mind racing through every worst-case scenario. When he saw her, pale, tubes in her arms, bandages wrapped tight around her torso, something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet snap like a wire pulled too tight. He didn't cry, not then. He just stood there gripping the edge of her bed, whispering, "Who does this to someone like you?" Back home, their mother had collapsed when she heard the news. She'd raised both kids alone after their father passed, worked double shifts as a home health aide, saved every penny so her kids could have chances she never did. Talia joining the army had scared her at first, but then she saw how proud her daughter was in uniform, how purposeful. She's not just serving the country, their mom used to say. She's showing folks what we're made of. Now that same daughter lay fighting for her life after being shot by the very people sworn to protect her. Outside the hospital, the world kept turning. The local news ran a 30-second segment that night. Woman injured during police encounter. They showed a blurry photo of Talia's car on the shoulder, lights flashing. No name, no background. Just enough to say something happened, not enough to make anyone care. But someone did care. Early the next morning, a retired schoolteacher named Ms. Evelyn, who lived 3 blocks from where the shooting happened, walked down to the spot with a single white candle and a small American flag. She didn't know Talia, had never even seen her before, but she'd heard the gunshot. She'd seen the ambulance lights cut through the dark, and when she read the vague news report, something in her gut told her the truth was being buried. She placed the candle on the gravel, stuck the flag into the dirt beside it, and stood there for a long time. A neighbor saw her and joined. Then another. By noon, a small circle of people had gathered, not protesting, not shouting, just standing in silence, holding signs that said pray for her and she served too. Meanwhile, at the police department, things were moving in the opposite direction. The 2 officers involved had been placed on administrative leave, standard procedure, they said. But they were still getting paid, still walking free. Their union rep had already issued a statement calling the shooting a tragic but necessary use of force, and warned against rushing to judgment. No one had asked Talia what happened. No one had interviewed Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor who saw everything. And the dash cam footage from the patrol car? The department claimed it malfunctioned during the stop. Convenient, people whispered. Too convenient. But the real turning point came from an unexpected place. Back at Fort Liberty, Staff Sergeant Reyes hadn't slept since seeing Talia's name online. He spent the night digging, calling old contacts, messaging people from her unit, even reaching out to a military journalist he'd met during deployment. By sunrise, he'd put together a short post on a private veterans forum, a photo of Talia in uniform, standing beside a group of Afghan girls she'd helped teach to read, with a caption that read, "This is Specialist Talia Brooks. She bled for this country. Last night, she was shot by police during a traffic stop. She's in critical condition. They're calling her a suspect. She's our sister." Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. Veterans from every branch started speaking up. Some posted their own stories, times they'd been profiled, harassed, or treated like criminals despite their service. Others demanded answers. A few even started calling local news stations saying, "You're missing the real story here." One of those calls reached a young reporter named Lena, who worked for a regional news network. She'd been assigned to cover city council meetings and school board debates, nothing flashy. But when 3 different veterans called her within an hour, all asking the same question, "Why isn't anyone talking about Talia Brooks?" She knew she'd stumbled onto something big. She drove to the hospital that afternoon, not as a reporter chasing a headline, but as someone who needed to understand. She didn't bring a camera crew, just a notebook and a voice recorder. Darnell was hesitant at first, but when she showed him photos of Talia's unit, faces he recognized from family visits. He let her in. She wasn't just a soldier, he told Lena, voice rough. She was the kind of person who'd give you her last dollar if you needed it. Who stayed late at the outreach center to help a vet fill out housing paperwork. Who called our mom every Sunday without fail. And now they're saying she lunged at them? She weighs 110 pounds soaking wet. She doesn't even own a weapon. Lena listened. Really listened. And when she left, she didn't write a sensational story. She wrote the truth clear, careful, and human. She included Talia's service record, quotes from her unit, and a timeline that didn't add up. Most importantly, she named her. Not the victim, not a woman. Talia Brooks, specialist, veteran, daughter, sister. The story went live that evening. Within an hour, it was trending locally. By midnight, national outlets had picked it up. Hashtags started appearing. Justice for Talia. She served too, not a suspect. But the most powerful response came from other service members. A group of off-duty soldiers from a nearby base drove to the hospital in uniform. They didn't march, didn't chant. They just stood outside the ICU entrance in a silent line, arms behind their backs, heads high, the same stance they'd use at a funeral. Nurses brought them coffee. Visitors stopped to thank them. One elderly man, a Vietnam vet, saluted as he walked by, tears in his eyes. Inside the hospital, Talia still hadn't woken up, but the world outside her room was changing. Back in the small town where it happened, tension grew. Some residents defended the officers, saying, "They have a hard job," or, "You don't know what really happened." But others, the ones who knew Talia from the outreach center, the ones who'd seen her helping homeless vets find shelter, the ones who'd shared coffee with her at the diner, started speaking out. "She used to bring socks and toiletries to men sleeping under the bridge," said Rosa, who ran the laundromat down the street. "Never asked for thanks. Just did it." A local mechanic named Clyde came forward too. He'd worked on Talia's car 2 weeks before the shooting. "She was worried about that taillight," he said. "Said she didn't want to get pulled over. I told her I'd fix it cheap, but she insisted on paying full price. Said it was the right thing to do." Then quietly he added something that would change everything. "I've got dash cam footage," he said, "from my delivery van. I was behind her that night. I saw the whole thing." He hadn't gone to the police. Didn't trust them after what he'd seen. But he trusted Lena, the reporter, so he handed over the memory card. The video was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Talia pulling over calmly. It showed her stepping out with her hands visible. It showed her backing away when the officer grabbed her. No lunge, no aggression. And it showed the exact moment the shot was fired. She was facing the officers, arms slightly raised, mouth open like she was saying something. Not a threat, a plea. When Lena reviewed the footage, her hands shook. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was evidence, but releasing it was risky. The police department had already warned against spreading misinformation. The officers' union had threatened legal action against anyone who defamed their members. And Talia was still unconscious, unable to speak for herself. Lena called Darnell. "This could help," she said. "But it could also make things worse. Once it's out, there's no taking it back." Darnell looked at his sister through the ICU window. Machines beeped. Her chest rose and fell, slow and shallow. He thought about all the times she'd stood up for others even when it cost her. How she'd once spent her entire leave helping a fellow soldier navigate VA paperwork instead of going on vacation. "She wouldn't hide the truth," he said finally. "Go ahead." The next morning the footage aired. Not on a major network at first, just Lena's regional station. Then shared across social media by veterans, activists, and ordinary people who couldn't unsee what they'd just watched. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had millions of views. People were outraged, but not just angry, grieving, because this wasn't just about one traffic stop. It was about what it meant when someone who served their country could be treated like an enemy in their own hometown. Protests began. Not violent, not destructive, but powerful. Veterans in uniform lining the streets. Families holding photos of their loved ones who served. Signs that read, "Honor her service and protect those who protect us." The police chief held a press conference, sweating under the lights, insisting the investigation was ongoing and thorough. But the public wasn't buying it. Calls poured into City Hall. Donations flooded into a legal fund for Talia's medical bills. And military leaders started asking questions. At the Pentagon, someone flagged the case. Not because of the politics, but because of the principle. The U.S. Army doesn't tolerate its soldiers being disrespected, especially not when they're targeted for who they are, not what they've done. And that's when the call was scheduled, not for the next day, not in the morning, at midnight. Because in the military, some things can't wait. But for now, as the sun set on the third day since the shooting, Talia still hadn't opened her eyes. Her body was healing slowly, but her mind was somewhere far away, maybe back in the desert, maybe in the quiet of her apartment, maybe in that terrible moment on the roadside when the world went silent. Outside, the candles kept burning. The flags kept flying, and the people who loved her and the ones who never met her but felt like they knew her kept standing. Because silence had failed her once. It wouldn't again. The clock on the hospital wall ticked past 11:30. Darnell was slumped in the same plastic chair, hoodie pulled tight around his shoulders, eyes half closed from exhaustion. He'd been sleeping in shifts, 20 minutes here, an hour there, but real rest felt impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. His sister's car on the side of the road, red and blue lights spinning, and then nothing but silence. His phone buzzed on the armrest. He didn't recognize the number, area code from North Carolina. He almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe. "Hello?" he said, voice rough. "Is this Darnell Brooks?" a man asked. Calm, clear. No background noise, just a steady, measured voice that sounded like it belonged in a briefing room, not a late-night call. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Colonel Vance with U.S. Army Special Operations Command. I'm calling about your sister, Specialist Talia Brooks." Darnell sat up straight. His heart thudded once hard. Is she okay? Did something happen?" "No, sir. Her condition hasn't changed. I'm calling because the Army has activated its casualty assistance program in her case." Darnell blinked. "Casualty assistance? But she's not. She's alive. She was critically injured while in uniform, off-duty but clearly identifiable as active-duty military," the colonel said. "And based on preliminary findings, the circumstances surrounding her injury raise serious concerns about how she was treated. The Department of the Army takes that very seriously." Darnell didn't know what to say. He'd expected pushback, silence, maybe a form letter weeks from now, not a colonel calling at midnight. "We don't leave our own behind," Colonel Vance continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Not overseas. Not stateside. Not ever." For the first time in days, Darnell felt something other than dread. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but it was close. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a room that had been dark too long. "We're sending a casualty assistance officer to your location first thing tomorrow," the colonel said. "He'll meet you at the hospital, help coordinate with medical staff, and begin documenting everything. We're also assigning a legal advisor from the Judge Advocate General's Corps to review the police report, body cam claims, and any available footage. And a public affairs liaison will be available if you choose to speak publicly. We'll support you, not control you." Darnell swallowed. "Why now?" "Why, you?" "Because someone in her unit flagged it," the colonel said simply. "Because her service record speaks for itself. And because when a soldier wearing the uniform of the United States Army is shot during a routine traffic stop and then labeled a suspect in official reports, that's not just a local issue. That's a matter of military dignity." He paused. "Your sister served with honor. She deserves to be treated like it." They talked for another 10 minutes. About Talia's unit, her awards, the outreach work she'd done after returning home. The colonel knew details Darnell hadn't even remembered. That she'd taught English to local women in Kandahar. That she'd once carried an injured civilian 3 miles to a field hospital during a sandstorm. That she'd turned down a promotion to stay with her team because they needed her more than a title. When the call ended, Darnell just sat there, phone in his hand, staring at the ceiling. He didn't cry, but his chest felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted just enough to let him breathe again. Outside, the night was quiet. But inside the Army, things were moving fast. By 2 a.m., a secure email had gone out to 3 different offices: the Office of the Provost Marshal General, the Army Equal Opportunity Program, and the Inspector General's office. By 4 a.m., a team was assembling: legal, medical, public affairs, all briefed on one mission: support specialist Brooks, and ensure her case was handled with the seriousness it deserved. Meanwhile, word spread through the veteran community like a signal flare. By sunrise, messages were pouring into Darnell's phone, not from strangers, but from people who'd served with Talia, trained with her, eaten meals beside her in dusty tents halfway across the world. Tell her we're with her. If she needs anything at all, call me. She carried my gear when I twisted my ankle on patrol. Now it's our turn to carry her. At the hospital, the morning shift nurses noticed something different. More visitors. Not just family, but men and women in civilian clothes who moved with a certain posture. Shoulders back, eyes alert, quiet but present. They didn't crowd the hallway, just stood near the entrance, nodding respectfully to staff, offering to grab coffee or run errands. One even brought a care package, protein bars, socks, a handwritten note that read, "From your brothers and sisters at Fort Liberty. Stay strong." Darnell met the casualty assistance officer, Captain Ruiz, at 9 a.m. sharp. Ruiz was in his late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a simple army green polo and slacks, no uniform, but you could tell he'd worn one most of his life. He shook Darnell's hand firmly, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm here to help. However you need." He didn't ask for permission to enter Talia's room. He waited. When Darnell nodded, Ruiz stepped inside, stood at the foot of the bed for a full minute in silence, then turned to the nurse. "What's her current status?" The nurse explained the vitals, the meds, the slow but steady progress. Ruiz listened, took notes, asked thoughtful questions, not like a bureaucrat, but like someone who genuinely cared. Then he turned to Darnell. "The colonel told me you've been handling everything alone. That ends today." Over the next few hours, Ruiz coordinated with hospital admin to ensure Talia's records were flagged for military liaison access. He contacted the local VA to fast-track mental health support for Darnell and their mother. He even called the outreach center where Talia worked and arranged for her job to be held indefinitely. "She's on medical leave with full military backing," he told the director. But the biggest move came that afternoon. Ruiz sat Darnell down in the hospital cafeteria, over bad coffee and stale muffins, and said, "We've reviewed the police report. It doesn't match witness statements, known facts, or basic logic. We're formally requesting the full investigation file, including any body cam, dash cam, radio logs, and internal communications, from the department. And if they refuse or delay, we'll escalate to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division." Darnell stared at him. "You can do that?" "We can," Ruiz said. "And we will. Because this isn't just about accountability. It's about sending a message. If you harm a U.S. soldier, especially because of who they are, you answer for it." That same day, the Army issued a rare public statement. Short, direct, no fluff. Specialist Talia Brooks is a decorated U.S. Army intelligence specialist, currently recovering from critical injuries sustained during a traffic stop in town name. The U.S. Army is providing full support to her and her family. We expect a thorough, transparent, and impartial investigation into the circumstances of this incident. Our soldiers serve with honor at home and abroad. They deserve to be treated with the dignity their service earns. The statement didn't accuse anyone, didn't demand arrest, but it didn't need to. The message was clear: the Army was watching, and they weren't going away. News outlets picked it up immediately. "Military steps in after soldier shot by police," read one headline. Another, "Army activates casualty protocol for wounded veteran, a first for domestic incident." Back in the small town, the police chief held an emergency meeting with city council. Rumors swirled that the state attorney general was considering taking over the investigation. The officers' union went silent. No more press releases. No more "stand by our brothers" rhetoric. People noticed. At the candle vigil outside the hospital, more veterans showed up, some in uniform, some not, but all wearing pins or patches that marked them as military. A group of retired officers stood together, arms crossed, faces grim. One held a sign that said, "I wore the badge and the uniform." Never both at the same time like this. Inside, Talia still hadn't woken up, but her vitals were stronger. The doctor said she might open her eyes soon, and when she did, she wouldn't be alone. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Darnell walked back to her room. Ruiz had left for the day but promised to return in the morning. The hallway was quieter now, but the presence remained, like the air itself was holding its breath. He sat beside her bed, took her hand, cool but not cold, and whispered, "They're coming for you, Tal, not to take you away, to stand with you." He told her about the colonel's call, about the soldiers showing up, about the mechanic who gave up the dashcam footage, about how her name was on lips from coast to coast, not as a victim but as a symbol of what happens when service is ignored, when dignity is denied. "You didn't just come home to rest," he said softly. "You came home to remind people what this country's supposed to be." Outside, a light rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing. On the windowsill, someone had left a single dog tag, engraved with her name, rank, and blood type. Below it, a note, "From your battle buddy in Delta Company. We got you." Midnight came and went. No more calls, no sirens. Just the steady beep of machines and the quiet hum of a system finally waking up to its duty. Because sometimes, justice doesn't start with a protest or a headline. Sometimes, it starts with a phone ringing in the dark, and someone on the other end saying, "We're here." The rain from the night before had left the streets glistening under the morning sun, but inside the hospital the air still felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Talia hadn't woken up yet, but her fingers had twitched twice that morning, and the nurse said that was a good sign. Hope, fragile but real, was starting to take root. Meanwhile, the world outside kept turning, only now it was turning toward her. It started with a post on a veterans forum. Someone from Talia's old unit uploaded a photo, her kneeling in the dust of a village in Kandahar, helping a group of girls arrange alphabet blocks. The caption read, "This is what she did when she wasn't being called a suspect." Within hours, more photos followed. Talia handing out school supplies, Talia laughing with local elders over tea, Talia standing guard during a sandstorm, goggles fogged, rifle slung, but posture unwavering. Then came the stories. A medic wrote about how Talia stayed up all night with a homesick private, just talking about his dog back home. A linguist shared how Talia learned basic Pashto phrases not because she had to, but because it made people feel seen. Another soldier posted a letter Talia had written to a fallen comrade's mother, a letter so full of grace and grief that it brought strangers to tears. People who'd never heard her name before began to understand. This wasn't just a woman pulled over for a broken light. This was someone who carried others when they couldn't walk, who gave her time like it was endless, who believed in service long after the uniform came off. And then quietly came the evidence. Clyde, the mechanic who'd fixed Talia's car weeks before the shooting, had been nervous about coming forward. He wasn't an activist, didn't like attention, but after seeing the police report, how it claimed she charged at the officers, how it painted her as aggressive, he couldn't stay silent. He drove to the regional news station himself, memory card in hand. "I don't care about fame," he told the reporter Lena. "I just care about truth." The dashcam footage from his delivery van was grainy but undeniable. It showed Talia pulling over calmly. It showed her stepping out slowly, hands visible. It showed her backing away, not lunging when the officer grabbed her arm. And it showed the exact moment the shot rang out. She was facing them, mouth open like she was speaking, arms slightly raised in a gesture that looked more like surrender than threat. Lena reviewed the footage with a forensic video analyst. They confirmed the timestamp matched the 911 call from Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor. They verified the location. They even enhanced the audio enough to catch Talia's voice. "I'm not armed. I'm a soldier." When the footage aired, it didn't just contradict the police report, it shattered it. National news picked it up within the hour. Cable networks ran split screens, the official statement on one side, the raw footage on the other. Social media exploded, not with rage but with disbelief. "How is this allowed to happen?" One comment read, "She was wearing her army jacket," said another. "You can see the patch." The pressure mounted fast. The state attorney general announced a full independent investigation. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights inquiry. Even the governor issued a statement calling for transparency and accountability. But the most powerful response came from within the military community. A group of retired generals, men and women who'd commanded thousands, signed an open letter published in a major newspaper. When a soldier is targeted not for their actions but for their identity, it betrays the very oath we all took. It read, "We stand with Specialist Brooks, and we demand justice." At the hospital, Darnell watched it all unfold on his phone, sitting beside his sister's bed. He didn't feel triumphant, just tired and grateful, because for the first time, the truth wasn't being drowned out by bureaucracy or bias. Captain Ruiz came by mid-morning with two others, a JAG officer named Lieutenant Cho and a public affairs specialist named Sergeant Mallory. They didn't wear uniforms, but their presence carried weight. "We've reviewed the dashcam footage," Lieutenant Cho said, sitting across from Darnell. "It changes everything. We're preparing a formal request for the Department of Justice to take over the criminal investigation. Local authorities have shown clear bias and lack of transparency," Sergeant Mallory added. "We're also coordinating with veteran advocacy groups to ensure public support stays focused and respectful. No violence. No destruction. Just truth," Darnell nodded. Talia wouldn't want chaos. She'd want clarity. "That's exactly what we're aiming for," Ruiz said. Later that day, something unexpected happened. A woman showed up at the hospital lobby, late 50s, silver hair pulled back, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a worn leather satchel. She didn't ask for Talia by name, just said, "I need to speak with her family." Security was cautious, but she handed over an ID. Dr. Elena Whitmore, retired Army psychologist, now a civilian consultant for trauma recovery and law enforcement cases. "I worked with soldiers for 30 years, she told Darnell when they met in a quiet waiting room. "I've seen what happens when systems fail the people who serve them. I'm here because if your sister wakes up, and I believe she will, she'll need more than medical care. She'll need someone who understands the weight of what happened to her." Darnell studied her face. There was no pity in her eyes, just quiet strength.
"Why are you really here?"
he asked. "Because I failed someone once," she said simply. "A young medic. Similar situation. Misunderstood, mistreated, left to deal with the aftermath alone. I swore I'd never let that happen again if I could help it." She didn't ask for payment, didn't ask for recognition, just offered her time. And Darnell, for the first time in days, felt like someone was thinking about his sister as a whole person. Not just a case, not just a symbol, but a human being who would have to live with this. That afternoon, another visitor arrived, Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor who'd called 911 the night of the shooting, walked in with a small potted plant and a handwritten letter. She was nervous, hands trembling slightly. I needed to see her," she said. "I've replayed that night in my head 100 times. If I'd run out sooner, if I'd screamed louder." Darnell hugged her before she could finish. "You did what mattered. You told the truth," she cried then, quiet, relieved tears. And before she left, she whispered to Talia's still form, "I'm so sorry they did this to you." Back in the town where it happened, the mood had shifted. The local diner, which had once been divided, some customers defending the officers, others demanding answers, now had a new sign in the window. "Proud to have served alongside heroes like Specialist Brooks." The owner, a Vietnam vet, started donating a portion of every meal to Talia's medical fund. Even the high school got involved. A group of students organized a letter-writing campaign. Hundreds of handwritten notes poured in, some from kids who'd never met her but who'd read about her work with Afghan girls. "You made them feel brave," one letter said. "Now we're trying to be brave for you." But the real turning point came from an unlikely place. The police department itself. One of the younger dispatchers, someone who'd been on duty the night of the shooting, reached out anonymously to Lena, the reporter. She'd heard the radio transmission, the officers' voices, calm, almost casual, right after the shot. "Suspect down. No weapon found." Then, minutes later, the shift supervisor, instructing them to stick to the script. When filing the report, the dispatcher included a recording. It wasn't much, just 30 seconds of audio, but it was enough to prove the narrative had been crafted before the facts were even known. When Lena played it for Captain Ruiz, he didn't smile, just nodded. That's the smoking gun. By the end of the week, the two officers were suspended without pay. The police chief resigned under pressure, and the city council voted unanimously to hand over all evidence to the state investigation. But through it all, Talia remained unconscious, yet her presence was everywhere. At military bases across the country, soldiers held moments of silence. At VA hospitals, counselors used her story to talk about racial bias and veteran identity. And online, a new phrase started trending. Not angry, not divisive, but powerful in its simplicity. See the uniform. See the person. Darnell kept a journal by her bedside. Not for the public, just for her. He wrote about the small things. How their mom finally slept through the night. How the bookstore downstairs left a copy of her favorite novel on the front seat of her car. How a stranger mailed a handmade quilt with patches from every branch of the military. You're not alone, Tal, he wrote one evening, and you never were. That night, as he sat reading to her from one of her old letters home, about watching stars in the desert, about how quiet the world felt when you truly listened, he thought he saw her eyelids flutter. He stopped reading, held his breath. Nothing, but the next morning the nurse came in smiling. She squeezed my hand today, she said. Just once, but it was real. Hope, once fragile, was now steady, because the truth had been spoken. The evidence had been seen, and the people who loved her, and the ones who'd never met her but now carried her story, had refused to let her be forgotten. All that was left was for her to wake up, and when she did, the world would be waiting, not with cameras or crowds, but with quiet respect, open hearts, and a promise: we see you, we honor you, and we won't look away again. The first time Talia opened her eyes, it wasn't with a gasp or a cry. It was slow, like sunrise after a long night. Just a flicker at first, then a little longer, until she was really looking around, taking in the pale walls, the beeping machines, the soft light filtering through the blinds. Darnell was asleep in the chair beside her, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. She watched him for a while, quiet, like she was making sure he was real. Then she whispered his name. He woke up so fast it was like he'd been waiting for it all along. Tal? His voice cracked. You're back. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. He handed her a cup with a straw, held it steady as she took a sip. How long? She finally managed. 8 days, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You gave us a scare. She didn't ask what happened. Not right away. Maybe she remembered. Maybe she didn't. But she didn't need to, because the moment she was awake, the world began moving again, not around her, but with her. The doctors came first, checking her vitals, asking simple questions, smiling when she answered clearly. Her body was healing. The bullet had missed her spine by less than an inch, but her strength was returning faster than they'd expected. You've got the heart of a soldier, one nurse told her, and Talia just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. But she didn't want to talk to reporters. Didn't want interviews or cameras. When Captain Ruiz came by that afternoon, she asked him one thing. Did they tell the truth? He didn't sugarcoat it. Not at first. But the truth came out. Because people refused to stay quiet. She listened as he explained everything. The dash cam footage, the dispatcher's recording, the Army's involvement, the national attention. When he mentioned the officers were suspended and the state had taken over the case, she didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just closed her eyes for a moment and said, good. Then she asked about Mrs. Callahan, about Clyde the mechanic, about the students who wrote letters. Ruiz had brought a binder full of notes, photos, and messages. She flipped through it slowly, fingers tracing the words like they were lifelines. One letter stood out, a drawing from a 10-year-old girl in Oklahoma. It showed a woman in uniform standing tall with a shield made of stars and stripes and the words, "You protected others. Now we protect you." Talia folded it carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her hospital gown. For the next few weeks, she focused on healing. Physical therapy was tough. Her side still ached, and walking more than a few steps left her winded. But she pushed through it the same way she'd pushed through ruck marches in basic training. One step at a time, no complaints. Her unit kept in touch. Every few days, someone would call or send a care package, homemade cookies, puzzle books, even a tiny cactus in a pot labeled "for when you're home." One night, a group of them video called from the base. They didn't talk about the shooting. They talked about old missions, dumb jokes, the time Talia tried to cook curry in a field kitchen and nearly set off the fire alarm. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since she'd woken up, but she knew she couldn't stay silent forever. One afternoon, sitting by the window with the sun warming her face, she turned to Darnell and said, "I want to file a lawsuit. Not for revenge, not for money, but because she knew if she didn't, nothing would change. They called me a suspect, she said quietly. Not a soldier, not a person. A suspect, and if I let that stand, it'll happen to someone else. Darnell didn't argue. He just nodded. Then we'll do it right. With the Army's legal team and a civil rights attorney who specialized in police misconduct, Talia filed a federal lawsuit. It wasn't flashy. No press conference. Just a clear, factual complaint outlining the violation of her constitutional rights, the false narrative spread by the department, and the emotional and physical harm she'd suffered. The filing made national news not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. Active duty service members almost never sue local police. But Talia wasn't doing it just for herself. She included a request for policy changes, mandatory bias training for all officers in the county, a review of traffic stop protocols, and a requirement that any interaction involving a uniformed service member be reported to military liaisons. People called it bold. She called it necessary. As the case moved forward, something else began to take shape, something quieter, but just as powerful. On the one-year anniversary of the shooting, a small group of veterans showed up at the spot where it happened. No signs, no speeches, just a dozen men and women in uniform, standing in a loose circle on the gravel shoulder. They wore their dress blues, medals polished, boots shined. One carried a folded American flag. Another held a single white rose. They stood in silence for exactly 11 minutes, the length of time it took for an ambulance to arrive that night. Neighbors came out to watch. Some cried. Others just stood on their porches, hands over their hearts. A local news crew filmed from a distance, but no one spoke to the camera. This wasn't for show. It was for her. For all of them. And it became a tradition. Every year after that, on the same date, at the same time, veterans returned. Sometimes it was 5 people. Sometimes 50. They never blocked traffic. Never shouted. Just stood in honor of one of their own. And in reminder that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Talia never attended the first few years. She wasn't ready. But by the 3rd anniversary, she walked out there herself, slowly with a cane but on her own 2 feet. She didn't say a word. Just stood among them, head high, eyes steady. Afterward, a young soldier approached her, nervous. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. My sister's thinking of joining the Army. Seeing you stand up, it gave her courage." Talia smiled. "Tell her the uniform's heavy, but it's worth carrying." Back in Washington, her case had sparked something bigger. Lawmakers, moved by her story and the Army's unusual public stance, introduced a bill called the Brooks Protocol, not named by her, but in her honor. It proposed federal guidelines for how law enforcement should interact with active duty and veteran service members, especially those of color. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't passed overnight. But it started a conversation that hadn't happened before, and Talia, once reluctant to speak, began sharing her story, not for fame, but for clarity. She testified before a congressional subcommittee, not in anger, but with calm precision. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," she said. "I just asked to be seen as I am. A soldier who served, a citizen who obeyed, and a human being who deserved to go home safely." Her words were quoted in classrooms, in training manuals and town halls across the country. But at home, she stayed the same. She returned to the outreach center part-time once she was able. Not as a hero, but as herself, helping vets fill out forms, listening to their stories, making coffee in the back room like she always had. She never moved away from that town. "Why would I?" she told Darnell once. "This is where I live, where I belong. Let them see me every day and remember what they almost lost." The legal case eventually settled, confidential terms, but with one public condition. The police department had to implement the training and reporting changes she'd requested. No admission of guilt, but accountability nonetheless. And the 2 officers? They never returned to the force. One left town. The other took a job far away. Talia didn't dwell on them. "They made their choice," she said. "I'm making mine." Years later, on a cool autumn evening, much like the one when it all began, Talia stood on her apartment balcony, wrapped in a light jacket, watching the sunset. Below, the street was quiet. Kids rode bikes. A dog barked in the distance. Normal life. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a young woman who'd just enlisted. "I saw your testimony," it read. It made me proud to wear the uniform. Thank you for not giving up, Talia typed back. Keep your head high. And never forget, you belong everywhere you go. She put the phone down and looked up at the sky. Stars were just starting to appear. She thought about all the nights she'd spent under foreign skies, wondering if home would ever feel safe again. And now here she was, alive, whole, and still serving, just in a different way. The world hadn't changed overnight because of her. But it had shifted. Just enough. And sometimes that's all it takes. One person refusing to be erased, one truth spoken clearly, one community choosing to stand together instead of look away. Talia Brooks didn't want a monument, didn't need a statue. All she ever wanted was to be seen, and in the end she was, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a soldier who came home and made sure others could too.